Good evening, everyone. My name is John Stewart. I'm Associate Dean for Cultural and Community Engagement at FIU's College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts. I'm delighted that you're here. It's Monday night, my absolute favorite night of the week, and I'm here with my partner in crime for the past 20 weeks, Deborah Briggs. In the real world, Deborah is a part of the team that runs the Betsy Hotel in South Beach, and they're a couple blocks away from the Miami Beach Urban Studios. And in the real world, we have very, very similar and very sympathetic programming together, and we look across the arts at all the ways in which art can help us, and in this case, help us to find our Zen. So we are looking for ways in which, in these turbulent times, we can find who we are and why we're here, and find a sense of comfort in the world, in the crazy world around us. So, Deborah, you are a sense of comfort, as always, when you're here, and welcome. I'm so glad to see you.
Thank you, John, and welcome everyone to our reading tonight. This is so exciting. We're going to have an evening of poetry, but before I tell you more about that, I wanted to thank our special partners tonight. We have actual partners from all over the country, organizational partners who believe in what MBUS, FIU MBUS, and the Betsy are doing during these times, and specifically are interested in amplifying the voices of our poets tonight. First, I wanted to thank the city of Miami Beach that generously funds FIU MBUS and enables them to be a pillar organization in our community, and the Plexico Wasser Foundation and the Betsy Hotel, which is why I'm able to be here tonight. At FIU, we also have the support of the LGBT community there and the Division of Academic and Student Affairs. The South Florida Poetry Journal, Julie Marie Wade lives in South Florida. Unity Coalition, and Celebrate Agullo. Unity Coalition's been a partner of ours for over 10 years. The Jewish Community Services Lambda Living Program, Ambiente, which is a media source focused on the LGBT community, Equality Florida, advocating for positive change and for legislation to assure equality for the LGBTQ community. Reading Queer, which is a Knight Foundation funded poetry program. Swim, which all of you know who've been joining us for the past 20 weeks. Swim did a series of 4 events with us. And Aqua Foundation for LGBTQ Women, that's also been a partner for many years. And finally, I wanted to mention the Transgender Strategy Center. So we're very proud of Araya Lester, who started Trans Miami many years ago in Miami, and now is working in the capital to, again, advocate for LGBTQ causes at a time when we all know that's so important. So back to our poetry. Tonight we're going to feature 2 amazing poets. And as many of you know, the Betsy is a poetry hotel. And both of these poets have been former artists in residence in our Artist in Residence program. And also with Julie Marie Wade, we have been partnering with FIU and Julie for the past, I would say, 7 years or so for the Writers on the Bay program, which is a project that brings in writers from all over the world to benefit students at FIU. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Julie, and then Julie's going to talk to us about herself and read a little bit, and then she will introduce Joy Ladin, who's our other amazing poet with us tonight. Julie Marie Wade teaches in the Creative Writing Program at Florida International University in Miami. Her newest collections are book-length lyric essay, Just an Ordinary Woman Breathing, and the hybrid forms chapbook, Pride, from which she will be reading tonight. Here's a quote from the front of Julie's website. I write best at intersections, the intersection of poetry and prose, past and present, sex and gender, families of origin and families of choice, heterosexual presumptions and lesbian experience. In all my work, I strive to pay close attention to language and the body. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Julie to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I see a lot of familiar faces and names out there, many of whom are my students, which is lovely. I am going to read from Pride tonight, and I'm already breaking the rules because this is a hybrid project, so it may sound, depending how it strikes your ear, it may sound more like poetry or more like prose to you. But Pride is a book that came out in June for Pride Month. It was a collaboration with the Vermont College of Fine Arts to do this limited edition chapbook, and it's a literary pride parade comprised of 25 floats. And they might surprise you in some ways in terms of their content. They're not always occasions of celebration, but they are occasions, I think, for rumination. And I'm going to read 4 of the floats tonight. It'll take about 12 minutes. And then I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Joy and Joy to you. So to begin, Float, Show Tunes, 1958 to 1962, and 1986 to 1997. My mother played accordion in her high school's marching band. I liked this part of our family lore and always wanted her to tell me more about it. My marching band mama must have had rhythm and verve. She must have worn patent leather boots and a tall white hat with a strap that fastened under her chin. Like a Shriner, but swankier. I bet my marching band mama looked sharp in a cutaway jacket with brass buttons and epaulets, acres upon acres of fringe. It all made sense, of course. We were both big fans of the Music Man. Later, my mother taught herself to play piano because, as she said, there's never going to be an accordion in a ballroom, because no one is ever going to call out in a lobby or a parlor or a fancy foyer somewhere, "Hey, anybody here know how to squeeze the squeeze box?" I think in her mind, my mother was always heading to a gala. For all I know, she's gala bound now. But if you said gala, she'd shake her head. Gala, like gals and guys. I heard a gay in it, but my mother didn't. This small fact has taken on monumental significance. And yes, in case you're wondering, she loved Liberace too. She denied the ugly rumors till the end. For many years, I sat beside my mother on the piano bench and belted out these tunes. I turned the pages of sheet music for her, which were often shaggy and thin as lace. My mother favored upbeat songs with lots of staccato and an aggressive beat. She didn't so much touch the keys as punch them. Then her knuckles sprang up like drops of water pinging in a cup. One Halloween in high school, I was invited to a costume party. "I have the perfect dress," my mother exclaimed. She dragged it up the basement stairs, unwrapped it on the living room rug. It was nothing but a big dollop of fabric frosting ensconced in cellophane. "I wore this," she beamed, "when I was a seafair princess." And when I didn't respond, she raised her voice a full octave and several decibels. "I was a member of the royal court, Julie. I rode in the grand parade." My friend April was going to the party as a devil, sexy red dress, horns, and a tail. I figured an angel was an easy counterpart, just some clip-on wings and a halo made from a wire hanger. "Wait, I have a tiara," my mother called from the hall. Though I insisted angels don't wear earthly crowns, she could not be dissuaded. Giddy at the prospect of rhinestones alone, she vowed, "You're going to be so pretty when I'm finished with you." "Mom, I'm not sure," but I didn't have a chance to protest because the dress didn't fit, because the dress wouldn't zip over my hips, because no matter how hard she tugged or how little I breathed, the back gaped wide as an angry mouth. "I don't understand." Huge tears stormed down her face. "I was in college when I wore this dress, older than you are now, and nowhere near as tall. My father came in at her bidding, but couldn't find the right thing to say, how to reassure us both at once. My mother considered aloud whether she should sew me into the dress, or if I'd only rip the threads clean through. Then I watched her face cascade, the hard tears resume. If you can't even wear this now, how are you ever going to fit into my wedding dress when that blessed day comes?" Float, The Crooked Line, autumn 1996. How I heard it, inexplicably in Closer to Fine, the deep self-knowing queerness of the singer. And then the second singer too, the one with the deeper voice who harmonized with her. Pauline from school gave me the CD. She never said much about the Indigo Girls, who they were or why they mattered to her, but they clearly did, and clearly she thought they would matter to me. How the first voice suddenly broke free from the score, leapt into space, then pulled the ripcord on her vocal parachute. There's more than one answer to these questions, pointing in a crooked line. I couldn't stop thinking about that crooked line, zigging and zagging, the way my father told me to walk up a hill so I wouldn't tire as easily. We did this all the time, walking in crooked lines. We lived at the summit of a very steep hill, which I sometimes ran up and down for exercise or when I was feeling anxious about something. But in the song, crooked was code, I thought. Not straight, not one foot in front of the other. Crooked meant taking a risk, leaping without knowing where you land. The singer was floating and the net was not below her but above. It wasn't even a net so much as a canopy with strings. How parachutes always came in rainbow stripes. You couldn't have a parachute that was all one color, could you? Not even indigo. It would match too much with the sky. And then the other voice swooped in, pitched lower, zigzagging underneath. The less I seek my source for some definitive. I didn't know what those words meant exactly, but I felt their meaning, precise as a sucker punch. How I studied the women's faces on the album cover. Was there a way to see the thing that made them different? And was it the same thing people saw when they looked at me? Float at the Hollywood YMCA, autumn 2014. It happens after I dismount from my spin bike. We're stretching and conversations have resumed in the dim light. A woman says to another that she thought Jen would be teaching tonight. No one's sure why we had a substitute. Was Jen sick, traveling, delayed at work? Jen has fans and I'm one of them. She's a tall, blonde woman with a deep voice who looks like a Nike model. These are just facts. Angie doesn't like to go to Jen's class because the front row is crowded with men ogling the teacher. They aren't subtle about it. You could slip on all the drool, Angie says. I'm drawn to Jen because she has a quality I want to channel in my own teaching, a passion for the subject that inspires the class. Nobody loves spinning more than Jen, and it shows. We feel her commitment to the ride. Perhaps because of her appearance, though, I'm a bit more circumspect around her. I ride further back than I usually would because, and here's an unfortunate truth, I worry that straight women will think I like them in a lesbian way. People presume things, and I know because I've been privy to plenty of their presumptions. Get ready, here's another. A man joins the conversation and says, my wife loves Jen's class and hates to miss, but she worries that Jen is, I know. That M dash is a hook and I'm wriggling on it now as I wipe down my bike, switch out my shoes. It's telltale. His voice drops. The two women lean in. Finally, he says, a lesbian, like it's a secret, a profanity, or both. One of the women gasps. It's so cliche, but cliches don't become cliches because no one ever does them. I bristle but don't turn around. She's not, is she? A man I know casually, a man who knows Angie and me, knows us as the lesbians we are, is quick to intervene, though not in the way I had hoped. He says, no, Jen's not a lesbian. She's married to Jimmy, one of the trainers in the gym. Now everyone breathes a collective sigh of relief. The man I don't know shakes hands with the man I do know, the man who doesn't bother to acknowledge me now, though we had spoken a bit before class. Thanks, man. I can't wait to tell my wife. She just thought, being so athletic that Jen might be, but cool. This will really put her mind at ease. This is me saying nothing as I leave the room. This is me saying nothing as I walk down the hall. This is me saying nothing as I unlock my car. And this is me inside the car, screaming. And I'll end with Float, Pulse, June 12th, 2016. I drive home from early morning spin and have breakfast with my partner. The car radio catches me up on the unfolding horror. When Angie asks what I know about Pulse so far, I cringe because the massacre has become a single word already. One charged metonym left to carry so much pain. Pulse, noun and verb. We'll never say it again without thinking of the shooting, which is another reason why the poet Robert Haas was right. Word is elegy to what it signifies. They were living, they were dancing, their pulses thumping hard, and now they're not. Word is paradox to what it signifies too. Pulse, no pulse, life, death, like a seesaw, that hyphen slick as a bullet between hinged, unhinged, full throttle, full stop. What we don't learn until later that night is why. There must be a why, we reason, yet no why could ever be sufficient to explain. In an interview with NBC News, Mir Sadiq, the shooter's father, stated that his son Omar Mateen had become angered after seeing two men kissing in Miami several months ago. How can a kiss, that sacred gesture known to seal promises and break spells, or more simply a kiss as the first pip on the domino tipping toward sex or love, that vast prospect carried by a single shared breath, incite such rage, such violence? Judas kissed Jesus in the garden, sealing his fate. The next day he was nailed to the cross. Kiss of death. Do you kiss your mother with that mouth? The killer did. The killer died. Kiss and tell, kiss and kill. No one says this, but still, kiss it all goodbye. Pulsing with sorrow and anger, I wait for someone to raise a banner of love. When Jameson Fitzpatrick publishes his poem for Pulse, I clutch it close to my chest like a shield. Or maybe that's wrong, like a promise, a credo, a what I believe or what I still want to believe is true. Anywhere you run in the world, he writes, love will be there to greet you. Around any corner, there might be two men or two women. I take this liberty, kissing. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I see you clap. Thank you. I now have the pleasure of introducing Joy Ladin, and this introduction came about, I'm going to give a formal introduction too, but last fall I got to teach a hybrid forms class with the graduate students at FIU, something I wanted to do for a really long time, and one of the writers in that class who deeply resonated with all of us was Joy Ladin and her work, not only the selections from the Book of Anna, but also what she wrote about writing in the anthology we were reading. We got to hear from each of the writers, and she had a lot of really important things to say about narrative and trauma and looking from different perspectives in your work. So you are in for a treat tonight, and I'll give the more proper introduction now. Joy Ladin is the Gottsman Chair in English at Yeshiva University. She has published 9 collections of poetry as well as 2 creative nonfiction books, which are called Through the Door of Life, A Jewish Journey Between Genders, and The Soul of the Stranger, Reading God and Torah from a Transgender Perspective. She serves on the board of Keshet, an organization devoted to full inclusion of LGBTQ Jews in the Jewish world. You can read more of her work, and I recommend it highly at wordpress.joyladin.com. Without further ado, this is Joy.
Thank you so much, Julie. I was so nervous before you started reading, and then I got so caught up in those incredible poems that I forgot to be nervous, and then you introduced me, and now I'm back to the nervous again. But thank you so much. I'm going to read two poems from The Future is Trying to Tell Us Something. And the first one, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it really speaks to the last poem that you read, Julie, about the pulse. But it's more general. Everything, literally everything I write is more general than what Julie writes. It's a real problem that I have. This is called The Problem with Death. Poor little death. Everyone's oohing over fresh-baked bread, laughing at things no one will remember. No one but you, our uninvited guest. You scribble notes on the palms of your hands, pool in the melted butter, search for your reflection in silverware smeared with our leftover pleasures. What are you doing here, Death? Is this all you are after? This skulking and terror? Sometimes bodies in the rubble, sometimes an empty chair. If I were your mother, if I were your friend, but you, Death, will never have either. No one to shake you in the middle of the night, to tell you you're having a nightmare, that there's nothing to fear, that no one can touch you, or that everyone can, that no matter what you do in your dreams, the smell of fresh-baked bread will waft from the ovens of the world. You don't know how to end. I want to read a very different kind of poem, one that I wrote, I was going to say during gender transition, but really this started as one of the poems that I wrote summoning me to become who I was. Like an embarrassing number of poems that I've written, all of the words in it come from a women's magazine. Possibly Cosmopolitan, possibly Cosmo Girl, anyway, whatever it is. It's called Half the Human Race. If happiness requires you to ruin your life by whirling between woman and man, why not sip a glass of wine and plant your feet in the oasis you glimpse beyond the shores of pain? Making up half the human race takes time. Women are more than spring plantings, candy that doesn't melt, angels struggling to stamp themselves into perfection. They tightrope walk into adulthood between searing fuchsias of right and wrong, struggling to heal, provide for their babies, comfort each other, breathe. As you outgrow the man you weren't, the blessings of the feminine stitch your anguish into invitation to a life of freedom wrested from suffering, a life you can share with generations of women by amputating rage and failure from both breasts at the same time, simultaneously splitting down the center and knitting together the girl you never had a chance to be and the old woman who claps in time to the heart you realize now that's never missed a beat. I want to read two poems from the current project that I'm working on, which is called Shekhinah Speaks. And they're in the voice of the Shekhinah, which in Jewish mysticism is the name for the immanent feminine or female aspect of the divine. In a Jewish tradition, that aspect of the divine doesn't get to speak because it's the female aspect. But in these poems, the Shekhinah does all the talking. And I especially wanted to mention, because of really Julie's students, that the Shekhinah also reflects this feeling that I had a couple of years ago when I was between projects, that I missed Anna from the Book of Anna. I miss, like, she just takes no prisoners. She speaks with absolute authority. She's not nice. She doesn't care what people think. And I thought, whatever happened to that? I know it wasn't an aspect of me, but come on, can't I channel a little of that? And so the closest I could come to carrying that on is actually imagining God speaking. So this is called Reconstruction, and this is a series of poems that the Shekhinah is, because she's immanent, she's with each of us all the time, experiencing what we experience. So she is the I, and we are each the you. And it's made out of words taken from two sources. One is the 20th chapter of the book of Isaiah, and the other is a Cosmopolitan article called "These Cancer Patients Wanted to Get Rid of Their Breasts for Good. The Doctors Had Other Ideas." Reconstruction. You're lucky to be alive, but you don't feel lucky. You feel like a world on fire. You want to opt out, to be flat, a pocket, two pockets of wishful skin, instead of a covenant with death. Instead of remembering how you've been violated, a little here, a little there, morning by morning, snare by snare, you wish you could move freely, run and swim, stretch out on a bed, reshape the culture that flattens your desires into tongues of stretched out dough, and make it a place where you don't have to hide, or at least a place of repose, where you can feel like more than layers of clothes you're too embarrassed to take off, a place where glory overflows your scars. What if your wish has already come true? What if you could remember? What if you knew that you are my diadem, my fertile valley, my hailstorm of laughter, milk from the breast of my righteousness? I tear apart the tissue of hopelessness that wrote and signed and witnessed your covenant with death, and put you back together, restoring your range of motion, giving you refuge, giving you rest. Little by little, you hear my voice. Little by little, you listen. Instead of the body you never wanted, you see land you can plant, and water, nuance, sexuality, summer. Instead of lies, grain turning into bread. Where you hoped at most to see nothing, justice ripening like a fig, you're ready to swallow as soon as it fills your hand. The last poem that I want to read is also a Shekhinah poem, and it was commissioned actually for a magazine that was doing an issue called Beyond Patriarchy, which is not really a word I use much in poetry. So it used to be called Beyond Patriarchy, but that I ended up feeling was a little too specific for the Shekhinah. I don't think she gives really a crap about patriarchy when push comes to shove. But I realized it was actually beyond fear. And the words are taken from the 41st chapter of Isaiah and a fantastic Cosmopolitan article called 7 Empowering Life Lessons from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Beyond fear. Are you ready to be strong? Are you ready to follow me beyond the demons, vampires, misogynistic gods who teach you to stay hollow inside, self-loathing and numb? Are you ready to stop stabbing yourself through the heart? You're afraid to answer because deep down you fear you're less than nothing. So anyone who would talk to you must be nothing too. Am I right? You were raised to be afraid, to believe the demons, the vampires, the misogynistic gods who warn you to hold your tongue when cruelty and brutality, degradation and evil stab you through the heart. Fear likes you this way, self-loathing and numb, believing you're no one I'd ever choose, a worm in a tunnel, chaff in a gale, a nameless pool of blood I could never love. It's hard to keep showing up when people keep telling you you aren't who you are. You, for example, keep confusing me with dust, or men, dead for thousands of years. Wondering how to tell us apart? I have power. They don't. I summon them all to judgment, the fears that stalk you to the ends of the earth, the shame and disgrace that nail you to your place, everything that gets in the way of you responding when I say, don't be afraid. I was here before fear, and I'm there beyond it, opening fountains in the midst of depression, trampling kings underfoot, calling you to me across generations by paths you haven't walked, by ways you cannot imagine. I'm the father who really sees you, the mother who understands you, every version, young and old, real and imagined, future and past, the guitar playing angel, the queer fluid light, the thresher of mountains, the solitary pine. Here's the soul you thought you lost. Here are myrtles and olives, deserts and brooks, entire continents I created for you. Here I am, the one who declares you have nothing to fear and nothing to prove, who conceived you and sold you, calls you and carries you, strengthens and stirs. Are you ready to be strong? Time to remake the world. Julie, your face was filling my screen the whole time, so I felt like I was just reading to you, which was a fantastic way of, I mean, that was actually just good in so many ways, but you helped me not be nervous. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a beautiful reading, Joy.
So I think the idea now is that, Julie, you are going to have some kind of responses or some conversation. Maybe Joy, you want to start and comment on Julie's reading, and then maybe have a conversation about your practices and how you approach it. I think that's how we kind of envision this coming into being. And by the way, if I'm large in anybody's screen, I've never been large in my screen in this particular Zoom thing, but these are two book covers I'm very proud to be sitting in front of. So.
Well, I don't know if you have a question already off the top of your head, but I do have something I wanted to ask you based on what you read. I wanted to know if you think about those splicings of like scripture and then secular text. Do you think about those as centos? Like, are they comprised entirely of work just from the book of Isaiah, say, and the pamphlet? Or are you also threading your own voice as a third voice throughout as you're arranging them?
Well, the Shekhinah poems are, the rule is that all the words have to come from one of the two source texts. And my goal is actually not to have my voice in it. I really want to mix language that isn't mine together in hopes that the voice of the divine will speak through it. So when she starts scaring me, I feel like I'm getting close.
That's a really good answer, but that's also really exciting to hear because I talk about the cento a lot with my students as a valid form of art making and an ancient one. But sometimes I think there's a feeling of reticence, like, is it really okay to use other work and then to use that much other work and then to be that deliberate about that? And so in some ways, even though we didn't plan this at all, what you read validated something that I've hoped that we could have permission to do in a lot of my classes for a long time. And I also love that there's a blending of like the holy and the ordinary or even the mundane to make this thing that is clearly not mundane at all. So thank you. Thank you. What you read is really illuminating.
Thank you. Well, I just want to say to any of your students who are here, they should totally listen to everything you say, and that it is definitely right, and that, you know, what the thing about words is none of them are ours. Right? I mean, words that are solely ours can't communicate anything to anyone else. They may completely, utterly express our meaning, but no one else will ever be able to get it. So in order to have a language that carries something of us to other people and back, we agreed to use words that are general and not specific to us. Unless, as you are, you put those words in the context of narratives, which are, because this is the amazing thing about stories, that I'm not sure this is really true of lyrics like I read, but I do feel that an absorbing story, you can come to understand the words that are being used in ways that are different outside the story. And I felt like, I mean, I just, this isn't really a question, but I wanted to say I was amazed by the way I was carried into your stories. This has happened to me before. And I feel like you just make time stop. Like you have the narrative time that's moving, but then you have time within the narrative to elaborate at any point and move in any direction without losing the thread and coming back. And there are many ways that you do that I admire, but one of them is the ways you bring in and reflect on other voices and points of view and consciousness. And that's where I feel like your words are really taking on meanings that I didn't have before entering the poem. And so I wish I had a more articulate question about this, but that art is so far from my art that I just want to say, how do you do that? How do you, yeah.
Well, thank you. I wish, now I'm going to say, I wish I had a better answer. But you're tapping into something that I want to believe is true. I mean, and I hope it's true, because I have been teaching as true for a long time, that if you can get more specific in your work, if you can get, if that's the intention of the work, and you're right, a lyric is different than a narrative in that way. But if you're unfolding a narrative in some sense, which is, you're trying to present this story, there's that paradox that people seem to care more deeply and be more deeply invested, more particular it is. And there's a part of our brain that's also telling us, oh, but isn't the way to include everyone in a story for the story to be very, very wide, and in that sense, very vague, right? So that everyone can find their portal. But it doesn't turn out that the narratives that most engage me, regardless of what their stated genre is, are ever very vague at all. They're highly specific, and they're often very different experiences, whether they're being coded as autobiographical or fictive. They're not being coded at all as one or the other. The narratives that tend to draw me in are those that are most specific, most particular, and that somehow becomes a door to something more universal. But that's a hard truth. Like, it makes perfect sense when you're involved in a narrative and you're invested in it, but it's a hard truth to just take. If you're in an intro to creative writing class, it's a hard truth to just take at face value that I'm going to tell you the most specific, particular account that I can, and that's going to be more moving for you and more powerful for you and more universally resonant than if I give you something that is vague and sort of you fill in all the blanks. And I trust in that, but I think that there are also so many ways that people find to do that, to access their particulars. But I do think that they bring us to something more universal.
When you were talking about the kind of narratives you love, it reminded me of Frank Bedard had said in a craft lecture, and then he repeated it over and over again as a refrain in a poem, which made me somehow feel like it was less special. I felt like he was saying it to me in the craft lecture, but he said, what you love is your fate. And I feel like, you're listening to stories, and when you love the stories, something inside you is saying, wait, what am I loving here? What's drawing me in? What's kindling me? And taking notes on it so that you can turn around and give that to your readers, which I think is a wonderful practice. But it also made me wonder, and this is like the kind of question that drives me crazy when people ask me it at a reading, but I do feel like different artistic, like, okay, so what we love is our fate, so we love a certain kind of poetry, it ends up feeding into what we write. Okay, cool. But then the stuff that we devote ourselves to in our practice, there are different, like the discipline of your poetry, the disciplines that are involved are different than the disciplines that are involved in me. And I'm wondering how the disciplines of narrative that you devote yourself to shape your way of being in the world. Like, do you find yourself literally taking notes on stories people are telling you while they're telling them to you? Do you, or is it not like that? Like, yeah, how does that shape you?
Well, I do try to, as soon as they're maybe out of sight, unless they're very patient and they are my deal, I'm writing it down. Reckoning with, like when people say something like, I was writing the entire time you were reading, but also now I've got, what you love is your fate, and I'm thinking about Frank Bedard and all the Frank Bedard poems that I love, but that's like a crystal now. It's a crystallized moment. So I am doing that in terms of interactions, with people. But honestly, the thing for me is, and I would like to know if this is the thing for you or if it changes for every project, but the thing that helps me want to take life and make it into something, hopefully resembling art, is like, I like a structure. I like to impose a structure first. I think this is a very Virgo thing, perhaps. And all of my friends who tell me you're such a Virgo, I think this is a Virgo thing, perhaps. But it's the fact that, like, I know that conversation that I overheard in spin class goes somewhere. And I know that the book has a lot of music in it, has a lot of film in it, it has a lot of television in it, like all the popular culture that I'm consuming. I know that those things are thematically connected with like interpersonal experiences and accidental witnessings and overhearings and big cultural moments and small cultural moments, and current events and past events in the news. But how are they all going to get into a project together? And for me, I need something like that it doesn't have to be an adopted form that other people recognize, like a parade. And so now I can put this as floats and we can like watch them go by together. But that gives me an anchor and a way to figure out, oh, this might go here and then this might go here. So it's a kind of arrangement. It's different than the cento work that you're doing, which is something I want to get better at, using imported text and blending it in a seamless way. But I'm interested in arrangement, but I'm also interested in like, what's the big structure of this project? And sometimes it's not until I know what the big structure is that I know what even goes there, from all the note making that I'm doing all the way through my life. And is that how it is for you when you talked about, being between projects and then hearing a voice calling you back, or feeling like I need to find this new way into what my next project is? And also, corollary question, do you find that you like to have a lot of different projects simultaneously, or do you do a very like a monogamous creator, one project at a time?
Mm. I'm going to take the last question first and then call my lifeline. The Shekhinah is not happy with me playing around. So I normally, once I started having children, before that I would say part of the lockjaw school of poetry. I felt like I had to lock into one poem at a time, and it would either live or I would break its neck. But I wasn't letting go until it was one way or the other. And I don't think that was necessarily super healthy. But having kids meant constant distraction. And so it meant that I had to learn how to live with a bunch of different things that were in different states of completion. And the Shekhinah poems are all in different states of completion. That all of them are drafted, but they're all like in different ways of growing. But yeah, she really is not interested in me entertaining other poetry projects while that's going on. In terms of the using other forms, I have so much I'd be happy to talk with you about, but part of us, so would be dumb, except my dissertation was masquerading as a critical study, but it was really me as a poet trying to figure out technical stuff that I could use. And so there was a whole thing about the way modernist poets splice together different things. And I write because a lot of what defines what we think of as modernism are different kinds of combination, but what do they, like I thought in some way they're all doing something that's similar, but it's all very different. Like what's the thing that's going on? And when I read Bakhtin, he talks about centripetal and centrifugal forces, I realized, oh, that's the way to think about it. So the stronger the centripetal forces that are on the bits of language that are put together, the more they homogenize into what feels like a single discourse. So to create a narrative that has many voices the way you do, you have to loosen the centripetal forces. You're letting other kinds of language in there. You're maintaining control. I don't want the Virgo part of you to freak out, but you're maintaining an overall control. But maybe that's another reason for the structure that you want to have. It's because you are really letting in other kinds of language, other discourses. They get to have their place and their role. They're part of the life. And so in modernist, what we think of as modernist poems, some of them, like Wallace Stevens, have so much centripetal force that it's almost like a discourse that makes sense. It's what I think of as, it's like a discourse with something wrong with it. It like almost makes sense, but it doesn't quite make sense. There's a little escape hatch where you can hear different voices jostling around, but can't quite put your finger on them. And the Shekhinah poems are more, there's a less, somewhat less centripetal force. Like you can hear a language where you're like, oh, that came from the Cosmo article. And oh, that's clearly Isaiah. But so that I think of as a discourse fusion where you can recognize the elements and you can vary the pressures on the language so that sometimes it moves more to sounding like one synthesized language, and sometimes you can hear the different things. And then if you loosen the pressures more, you get something that feels like a discourse collage, like The Wasteland, where you have these spliced bits of things that are going on. And so there's a whole bunch of ways you can do this. That would have been the short way to answer, sorry.
Okay. I like the long way. And I like discourse collage, which also I feel like that should be a band name. I'm a big fan of already discourse collage. But so I just want to follow up. So you did a critical dissertation in addition to your work. I mean, and those divides, critical, creative, I mean, those are the very kind of divides I like to break down all the time, or at least challenge. But so you did like a early dissertation, and then were you able to incorporate your own poetry, creative work in the dissertation, or was that a separate part of your academic life?
Well, I was writing the Book of Anna while I was doing the PhD, and so I was using the dissertation to think through the stuff that I needed to work through the Anna poems, but I didn't let on that that's what I was doing in the dissertation, because I had hopes of getting a straight academic job.
Gotcha. I think this is maybe my favorite question that I should be asking more academics, like what are your secret projects, or what were your projects that were the shadow projects to the projects everybody else knew about? Because those are always the projects that like where is that vitality coming from? It's hooked up to something else that you're doing as well. So, but I didn't know that, and I really like knowing that, like what's powering what, you know?
One of my classmates was a blues harmonica player. That was his secret project.
Oh, and right. Of course, it doesn't have to just be literary, right? It's like, what's your other art source? What else are you making to fuel and sustain you while you do this long thing that everyone is expecting? Wow. Blues harmonica, that's good too.
I just want to jump in here because I mean, this conversation has been absolutely incredible. And really wonderful. And you guys just have such energy. I could sit and listen to your conversation with or without a spin class, just, you know, going on. There were a few questions where, but one of them was really a much more pragmatic question. I'm only throwing it in there because you've been talking, you know, in more, in less pragmatic ways about your work and where it goes. But this was just about you two being so busy, such busy people with so much happening in your lives. How do you carve out time for your practice? And it's kind of the shadow story that you may or may not have about finding time for yourself and your work in the busy world. And this is part of our Zen question, by the way.
Julie, do you want to? Okay, so I have to work on poetry. It does, fortunately for me, it does not have to be good poetry, because, but I start falling apart if I go too long without it. But I also, and again, this started with having kids, mostly before having kids. I could just do it. But once I had kids, I realized, oh, I have to put other things ahead of this. And so how can I tell myself that I'm still committed to it when I'm allowing other things to come first? Because really, I think babies are more important. So are toddlers who are about to kill themselves. Even teenagers are more important than poetry. I think young adults, it starts to be questionable. But anyway, you know, I also feel like I have to put my students first as a teacher, that's a sacred trust. And so what I have to do is pay attention to the need that I feel inside myself. And sometimes when I feel everything flattening out or going dead, or I'm just pissed off at everybody, I realize, oh, right, that's because I just need to do this poetry thing, which feels utterly useless, but which I have to do, or I can't do anything else.
That's a really good answer. I agree with that, especially the last part about just sometimes you have to yield to it completely, and it won't let up, and you make more time. I always think about the busiest time in my life. For 1 year, 2007 to 2008, I was a humanities teacher at a boarding school in rural Ohio. My partner was the school librarian, and I'm a sleeper. You know, I like my 8 hours every night. And when I lived there, you know, we maybe slept like 3 hours a night. There were a lot of duties, you know, in boarding school life that, not having been a boarding school student myself, I didn't know all of the, that being a teacher didn't mean that you just taught like from 8 until 3 every day, but that it meant that sometimes you're the nurse, and sometimes you're the coach, and sometimes you're the counselor, and you have all these other responsibilities. And I really loved my students, and I felt that sacred trust. And I actually thought after that year that I probably didn't belong at a boarding school in rural Ohio, but that I belonged with students. Like, that was affirming in a way that I knew I had to be with students forever, if at all possible. But I would get up, you know, like I would have maybe 3 hours, and I would set my alarm so that I only got the 2 hours, so that I always had the 1 hour. And I was like, seems impossible, because I'm a sleep person. I sleep, you know, but not that year. But it was setting that extra hour, like just finding that extra time, even though I really didn't have it. Then it felt like also it was mine, because, you know, most of the time everybody at the boarding school was asleep between 3 and 4 in the morning, but not me. And that's when I was writing some of my first big essays were written at that time. And I mean, I don't even get up that early now, and I am a morning person, but it was like, that was the only time I could seize that time. But in a bigger way, like in a more, you know, I guess, more philosophical way, I guess, the thing that I try to remember is, no matter how busy things are, I mean, sometimes you have to put everything on hold because you're grading finals, or you have family commitments that, you know, they're not tomorrow, they're not next week. But it's just like the mindset that the work, like doing the writing, is always the reward. It's not the thing that you're trying to get away from doing. like instead of doing that, I'll do all these other things that are, you know, like domestic chores or things that, yeah, you have to do them. But like, it should be like, when I get done with all these dishes, I get to write, not I'm going to do these dishes and then maybe make a bigger mess so that I can clean that mess so that I don't have to write. Like, you don't want to, it's like making the writing always the reward and the thing you get to look forward to. I find that when I always keep that in the front of my head, that I'm always going to seek out the writing, even if it does mean like setting an alarm at 3 a.m., which thankfully I haven't had to do for a while, but I will do it if I have to.
Well, that was also an excellent answer. You guys are both, I feel like I've just learned so much from you both, and your conversations and your comments about time have reminded us that we are just about at the end of our time together. This has been a beautiful experience. And Deborah, and what we'll do is we'll open it up to everybody to say hello. But Deborah, first, you want to say a word about next week's program, and then we'll...
Sure. First, let me give my own thanks for such a great conversation between the two of you. That's a rare opportunity to have you guys connect like that and have us witness it. So thank you so much for being willing to do that. Next week, we are featuring Carol Ann Taylor. Carol is a force to be reckoned with in business, in community building, and in music. She is a jazz performer. And she's also the founder and president of Cultures to Go, Miami to Go, a store. And she's on many, many boards of directors in Miami, the Arts Center, and many others. I tell you all that because it'll be a very interesting evening where we will share some of her performances, but we really want to get inside her head and talk to someone who's a Renaissance person. So that's next Monday at 7 o'clock.